First impressions. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Westfield Academy as 17-year-old Ethan Rivers pushed through the heavy oak doors for the first time. His backpack, patched with duct tape at the corners, hung loosely from his thin shoulders. The sneakers on his feet had seen better days, their once white canvas now a mottled grey, but they were clean and carefully maintained. Ethan clutched his schedule tightly, scanning the crowded hallway for room 204. Students moved in clusters around him, their designer clothes and expensive gadgets creating an invisible barrier he couldn't cross. He'd grown accustomed to being an outsider, moving from school to school as his grandmother's medical bills forced them to relocate repeatedly in search of cheaper housing. "Watch where you're going, scholarship boy," a sharp voice cut through the morning chatter. Ethan looked up to see a girl with perfectly styled auburn hair and emerald eyes that seemed to appraise him like a piece of unwanted furniture. Victoria Sterling stood at the center of a circle of admirers, her presence commanding attention without effort. Her uniform was pristine, her accessories subtle but clearly expensive, and her smile held a kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly, though he hadn't actually bumped into anyone. He'd learned long ago that apologies often diffused situations before they escalated. Victoria's laugh was crystalline and cold. Did everyone hear that? His sorry for existing. Her followers giggled on cue, their eyes bright with the thrill of witnessing someone else's discomfort. "Let me guess, thrift store backpack, generic sneakers, and that deer-in-headlights look. You must be the new charity case." Ethan's cheeks burned, but he kept his expression neutral. He'd endured worse than high school cruelty. Caring for his grandmother through chemotherapy, working night shifts at the diner to pay for her medications, sleeping on a cot in their studio apartment. Those challenges had taught him that words couldn't truly hurt him unless he let them. "Victoria, leave him alone," a voice called from across the hallway, but it was quickly drowned out by more laughter. "What's your name, charity case?" Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that somehow carried to everyone nearby. "I want to make sure I know who to avoid in the cafeteria. Poverty might be contagious." "Ethan Rivers," he replied simply, meeting her gaze directly. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, maybe, at his lack of visible reaction to her cruelty. The bell rang, saving him from further humiliation. As students dispersed to their classes, Ethan caught Victoria watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Curiosity? Disappointment that he hadn't provided more entertainment? Walking to his first class, Ethan reminded himself why he endured these situations. His grandmother needed him to succeed, to graduate, to build a future that could support them both. The opinions of privileged teenagers meant nothing compared to her gentle smile when he brought home good grades or the way she squeezed his hand during her difficult days. What none of them could know was that Ethan carried secrets far deeper than his financial struggles, secrets that connected him to a world of fame and influence he deliberately left behind. Beneath the surface. The following weeks at Westfield Academy fell into a predictable rhythm of torment for Ethan. Victoria had made him her primary target, orchestrating daily humiliations with the precision of a military campaign. She would accidentally knock his lunch tray from his hands, organize whisper campaigns about his second-hand clothes, and ensure he was excluded from every group project worth participating in. "Look, it's our resident charity case," Victoria announced one Tuesday morning as Ethan approached his locker. She stood with her usual entourage, Madison, her blonde shadow who repeated everything Victoria said, James, the quarterback who followed Victoria's lead to stay in her good graces, and several others whose names Ethan had never bothered to learn. "Did you sleep in those clothes, Rivers? They look even more wrinkled than usual." Ethan silently opened his locker, retrieving his chemistry textbook. The binding was cracked and the pages yellowed, clearly used by multiple students before him. He'd grown skilled at ignoring their comments, focusing instead on the internal countdown until he could leave school and return to his grandmother. "I heard his grandmother is some kind of cleaning lady," Madison whispered loudly enough for half the hallway to hear. "That's probably why he always smells like disinfectant." This time, Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. They could mock his appearance, his poverty, even his solitude, but his grandmother was off limits. She was the kindest person he'd ever known, raising him with grace and dignity despite their circumstances. Victoria noticed his reaction immediately. "Oh, Did I hit a nerve? The orphan boy doesn't like when we talk about Grandma. She's not just a cleaning lady, Ethan said quietly, his voice steady but firm. She's a good person who works hard to take care of people. That's more than I can say for some. The hallway fell silent. Students who had been rushing to class slowed down, sensing drama. Victoria's eyes flashed with something dangerous. No one had ever talked back to her before, especially not someone from Ethan's social stratum. That afternoon, Ethan left school quickly, as he always did. He had exactly 20 minutes to get to Mercy General Hospital before visiting hours ended. The bus ride took 18 minutes if traffic cooperated, leaving him little margin for error. He found his grandmother, Rose, in the oncology ward's waiting area, her silver hair neatly braided despite her obvious fatigue. At 72, she maintained an elegance that poverty couldn't diminish. Her hands, weathered from years of hard work, held a worn paperback novel. "How was school, my dear?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight Irish accent that had never faded despite decades in America. "Fine, Grandma Rose." "The usual." Ethan settled beside her, automatically checking her color and breathing. Her latest chemotherapy session had been particularly difficult, leaving her weak and nauseous for days. "You know, Ethan, when I was your age, I faced my share of cruel children too. The key is remembering that their cruelty says nothing about you and everything about their own pain." Ethan looked at her sharply. "I never said anyone was cruel to me." Rose smiled gently. "You don't have to say it, love. It's written all over your face. But remember, you're stronger than whatever they can throw at you. You've got good blood in your veins, from both sides of your family." As they waited for her appointment, Ethan helped Rose fill out insurance paperwork, his young hand steady as he calculated co-payments and reviewed treatment options. Other patients and families watched them with subtle admiration. The teenage boy who spoke to nurses with respectful authority and held his grandmother's hand during the difficult moments. What none of them knew was that Ethan could afford the best private care money could buy. One phone call to his adoptive father would solve every financial problem they faced. But he'd made a promise when he was 12 years old, to live independently, to prove he could succeed without trading on fame or fortune. That promise meant everything to him, even when it meant watching the most important person in his life suffer. Shattered assumptions. Victoria's campaign against Ethan intensified after his unexpected display of backbone. She recruited more students to her cause, turning his existence at Westfield Academy into a daily gauntlet of sneers, whispers, and calculated social exclusion. Yet something nagged at her, the way he defended his grandmother, the quiet dignity he maintained even under pressure. On Friday afternoon, Victoria decided to follow him. She told herself it was simple curiosity, a desire to see how the other half lived. Her driver dropped her off 3 blocks from the school, and she trailed Ethan through the city streets, careful to maintain distance. She expected him to head toward the rundown apartments near the industrial district. Instead, he took a bus toward the medical center. Victoria's curiosity deepened as she followed on foot, her expensive heels clicking against the pavement. At Mercy General Hospital, she watched through the glass doors as Ethan approached the information desk with obvious familiarity. The receptionist smiled warmly at him, clearly knowing him by name. Victoria felt an uncomfortable twist in her stomach as she realized this wasn't a casual visit. She slipped inside, following at a distance as Ethan navigated the corridors with practiced ease. He stopped at the oncology ward, where an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair waited on a bench. The woman's face lit up when she saw him, and Victoria watched in growing discomfort as Ethan sat beside her, immediately checking her hands and asking quiet questions about her comfort. "Mrs. Rivers." A nurse approached them. "Dr. Morrison is ready for you now." Victoria watched as Ethan helped his grandmother stand, supporting her elbow with gentle care. They disappeared into an examination room, leaving Victoria standing in the hallway, her worldview beginning to crack at its foundations. 20 minutes later, they emerged. Victoria ducked behind a pillar as the nurse handed Ethan a prescription bag and a stack of papers. "The insurance should cover most of it," the nurse was saying, "but there's still a copayment of $400 for this round of medications." Victoria saw Ethan's shoulders straighten slightly, but his voice remained calm. "That's fine. I'll take care of it." At the pharmacy window, She watched him count out crumpled bills from his wallet, coming up short. Without hesitation, he excused himself and approached the ATM, checking his balance multiple times before withdrawing what appeared to be his last bit of savings. "I'm sorry for the wait, Grandma Rose," he said softly as he handed her the medication bag. "Do you want to get something to eat before we head home?" "Oh, dear, you've spent enough money today. I have soup at home." "It's Friday," Ethan insisted gently. "Friday is our diner day, remember? Besides, you need to keep your strength up." Victoria followed them to a modest diner 6 blocks away, watching through the window as Ethan helped his grandmother into a booth and carefully reviewed the menu with her, pointing out items rich in protein and nutrients. When their food arrived, she noticed he'd ordered only coffee for himself while ensuring his grandmother had a full meal. "You need to eat too, my dear," Rose said, pushing half her sandwich toward him. "I'm not that hungry, Grandma. Besides, I had a big lunch at school." The lie came easily, but Victoria could see the caring concern behind it. As she watched them share the meal, Victoria felt something she'd never experienced before: genuine shame. Here was a boy she'd systematically tormented, demonstrating more love, responsibility, and maturity than she'd ever witnessed. While she spent her days worrying about social status and designer handbags, Ethan was caring for a sick grandmother with grace and selflessness. The next Monday, Victoria found herself unable to meet Ethan's eyes in the hallway. When Madison started to make another cruel comment about his appearance, Victoria surprised everyone by cutting her off. "Leave him alone," she said quietly. "But Victoria, we always—" "I said leave him alone." For the first time since Ethan had arrived at Westfield Academy, he walked through the halls without harassment. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Sterling felt the weight of her own cruelty. Unexpected revelations. The change in Victoria's behavior didn't go unnoticed. For 2 weeks, she maintained her distance from Ethan while calling off her followers' harassment campaign. She found herself watching him during classes, noticing details she'd missed before: how he helped struggling students with homework, how teachers respected his thoughtful contributions to discussions, how he carried himself with quiet confidence despite his circumstances. Her guilt gnawed at her until she finally worked up the courage to approach him after school. She found him at his locker, packing his worn textbooks with methodical care. "Ethan," she said softly, causing him to look up in surprise. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" His expression was guarded but not hostile. "What about?" "I want to apologize. For everything. The things I said, the way I treated you, it was wrong." The words came out in a rush, her usual eloquence abandoning her. "I saw you at the hospital with your grandmother, and I realized I don't know anything about you or your life." Ethan closed his locker slowly, studying her face. "You followed me." Victoria's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Yes, and I'm sorry for that too. But seeing you with her, seeing how you take care of her, I've never seen anything like it. I've been horrible to someone who's actually—" She struggled for words. "Someone who's actually amazing." For a long moment, Ethan was silent. Then, unexpectedly, his expression softened slightly. "Why? Why were you so cruel to me from the beginning?" The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. She'd never been asked to examine her motivations before. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because it was easy. Because everyone expected it. Because I could." She shook her head, disgusted with herself. "Those aren't reasons. They're just excuses." "Yes, they are." Ethan's voice wasn't angry, just honest. "Do you know what it's like to start at a new school every year because your family can't afford to stay in one place? To work nights so your grandmother can get the medicine she needs? To be treated like garbage because of your clothes?" "No," Victoria whispered. "I don't. And I'm sorry." Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Victoria began leaving small gestures of apology, a sandwich appearing on Ethan's desk during lunch when she noticed he wasn't eating, help with a group project when others tried to exclude him, subtle interventions when students attempted to mock him. Ethan remained cautious but began to respond to her overtures. He discovered that beneath Victoria's polished exterior was an intelligent, surprisingly insecure girl who'd built her identity around others' fear of her disapproval. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Victoria offered Ethan a ride home when she noticed him waiting at the bus stop in a downpour. After initial hesitation, he accepted. "Turn left at the next intersection," he directed as they drove through an unfamiliar part of town. "I thought you lived in the apartments near." "That was our old place. We had to move last month when the rent went up." Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact, but Victoria caught the underlying stress. They pulled up to a modest duplex with a well-maintained garden. As Ethan gathered his backpack, the front door opened, and Victoria's world tilted on its axis. Standing in the doorway, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, was one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. Liam Neeson smiled warmly as he approached the car, completely at ease in this ordinary suburban setting. "You must be Victoria," he said, extending his hand through the passenger window. "Ethan's mentioned you. Would you like to come in for tea?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she stared between Ethan and his famous adoptive father. Suddenly, everything made sense: Ethan's composure under pressure, his quiet confidence, the way he carried himself like someone accustomed to dignity even in difficult circumstances. I should probably get home," she managed to stammer. Liam smiled knowingly. "Another time, perhaps. Ethan, don't forget your grandmother has her appointment tomorrow." As Victoria drove away in stunned silence, she finally understood why Ethan had seemed different from other students. He'd been raised by someone who understood real strength, real character. And somehow, despite having access to wealth and fame, he'd chosen to live authentically, caring for his grandmother and facing his challenges with integrity. The boy she'd tormented for his poverty was connected to more privilege than she could imagine. Yet he'd never used it, never leveraged it, never even mentioned it. The humiliation of her past behavior was overwhelming, but it was accompanied by something else: a growing admiration for someone who'd proven to have more character at 17 than she'd developed in her entire privileged life. Second chances. The revelation about Ethan's background changed everything for Victoria, but not in the way she'd expected. Rather than being intimidated by his connection to fame, she found herself even more ashamed of her past behavior. Here was someone who could have easily used his adoptive father's influence to smooth his path through life, yet chose instead to face genuine hardship with dignity. Victoria threw herself into making amends. She volunteered to tutor struggling students, organized food drives for families in need, and gradually dismantled the toxic social hierarchy she'd spent years building at Westfield Academy. Her former followers were confused by the changes, but Victoria no longer cared about their approval. Ethan watched her transformation with cautious hope. Trust didn't come easily to someone who'd been hurt as deeply as he had, but Victoria's actions spoke louder than words. She never mentioned his famous father or tried to leverage their growing friendship for social gain. Instead, she simply showed up, helping him carry his grandmother's groceries, studying with him in the library, listening when he needed someone to talk to about Rose's declining health. One evening in late spring, Victoria found Ethan sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, his head in his hands. Rose had taken a turn for the worse, and the latest round of treatments wasn't working as well as hoped. "I don't know what I'll do without her," he admitted quietly as Victoria sat beside him. "She's been my anchor my whole life. Even before I was adopted, she was the one person who made me feel like I mattered." Victoria reached out tentatively, covering his hand with hers. "Tell me about her. About your life before." For the first time, Ethan opened up completely. He spoke about being in foster care, about meeting Liam at a charity event when he was 9, about the gradual process of becoming part of a family while maintaining his connection to Rose, who had been his foster grandmother. "Liam never tried to replace her," Ethan explained. "He understood that she'd saved me in ways that went beyond just providing a home. When I turned 13, I asked him if I could live with her again, help take care of her. He said yes, but only if I promised to let him know if we ever needed anything." "But you never ask for help," Victoria observed. "I promised I'd make it on my own merit. Prove that I could be worthy of his name through my actions, not his money." Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. "But watching her suffer while I count pennies for her medication, sometimes I wonder if my pride is worth more than her comfort." "That's not pride," Victoria said firmly. That's integrity. And it's one of the things that makes you extraordinary. As Rose's condition stabilized over the summer, Ethan and Victoria's friendship deepened into something more. Their first kiss happened in the hospital garden, surrounded by blooming roses that reminded them both of the woman who'd taught them about unconditional love. When senior year began, they walked through Westfield Academy's halls hand in hand, their relationship a testament to the power of forgiveness and growth. Victoria had become someone she'd never imagined she could be: compassionate, humble, and genuinely happy. Ethan had learned to trust again, to believe that some people could change their hearts completely. At graduation, Rose sat in the front row wearing a new dress that Victoria had secretly bought for her, her face glowing with pride as both Ethan and Victoria delivered speeches about second chances and the courage to become better than who you were. Liam Neeson sat quietly in the back, watching his adoptive son with obvious pride, understanding that Ethan's greatest achievement wasn't academic success but the strength of character he'd maintained through every challenge life had thrown at him. As they threw their caps into the air, Victoria whispered to Ethan, "Thank you for forgiving me. For seeing who I could become instead of who I was." "Thank you," he replied, "for proving that people really can change. That kindness can grow even where cruelty once lived." Their love story had begun with hatred and humiliation, but it bloomed into something beautiful because they'd both been willing to look beyond surface judgments and see the truth beneath. In a world that often rewarded superficiality, they'd found something real, and that made all the difference. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.